in the field. I've been a clinical social worker for a very long time, and been in the social work field since I'll just say the 90s. That makes it sound a little better.
I think we finished the same year.
So I'll just leave it at that. So I've really enjoyed the opportunity. I was always passionate about working with people with disabilities. It's kind of a family business, something my father had done his whole life and his whole career. And so I inherited the passion for that, not knowing that it would well prepare me for being the mother of kids that I would have to advocate for as well. So I think I braid those two together as a parent and a professional, and have been able to use both of those experiences to be better at both. I think I'm a stronger professional for my parenting experiences and a stronger parent for my professional expertise. Although don't ask my 19-year-old that; she'll tell you I'm too much of a therapist to her. We do our best to stay in balance between those two roles.
If you can explain to everyone how ADHD and autism are subjective diagnoses, and there's no kind of official test for either of them yet.
Yeah, I think a good place to also start is to understand that I always like to sort of say back in our day. So back when my 22-year-old was diagnosed, he was diagnosed at the age of 5. This was before the DSM-5. Not to get technical, but just to say that back then there literally was not permission to diagnose both at the same time. There was not in that time, you were not allowed to say that someone with autism also had ADHD, which I know is a different topic, but I do think it's kind of relevant here because I think that when that differentiation was erased, when people were saying, well, someone with autism may also have ADHD, I think then all of a sudden it seems like that's when the lines started to get really, really blurry. And I think that's when we started to see this confusion. And I think what people want to do is make it simple. People want to make it simple. They want to make it as simple as checking a boxes. We call it in the field, fancy name differential diagnosis, which means you have to literally check the boxes. But if you don't have someone who's experienced, you don't take in the entire context, and you can't diagnose somebody without a full context. And so, in any given moment, anyone can look anything, even one of the really famous autism advocates, Temple Grandin, who I'm sure many people have watched or seen or watched YouTube videos of, or her movie, or seen her in person, or read her books. She loves to say, for example, she'll say, well, autism is just being ultra male. That's one of her quotes, or something like that. So it's like, well, at any given time, any guy could be diagnosed as autistic, right? And I don't mean that, but I'm just saying that, there are traits that we all have that could be considered autistic at any particular moment in time. And so the question is not, can I check those boxes at this moment in time? The question is there an ongoing pattern that together makes a constellation? And then the second question isn't just, do I have these traits? The second question in any diagnosis is, do these traits get in the way? Do these traits inhibit my life? Do they cause me to not function socially, do not function to a serious degree, not a little bit of a degree, right? Not just, I don't have great friends, or I'm not the social butterfly, or I don't meet parental expectations, but does it mean like I am seriously not functioning socially? I am seriously having deficits. It is seriously getting in the way of me functioning. Or is it getting in the way of school functioning? Or is it getting in the way when we're older of work functioning, or family functioning, or relationships? So you need those two things in a diagnosis. The one is the complete context that we see this as patterned, as happening over time, as happening in many different contexts, not just in one, and I think one of the other reasons that this all gets really, really blurry right now is because we're talking about a particular part of the brain that affects ADHD and autism, and that's the frontal lobe.
Executive functioning.
Executive functioning happens. Well, the other problem that we're having is that we have an anxiety epidemic in our country right now. And anxiety produces, and stress of any kind, produces hormones that shut down the executive functioning part of the brain, or impair it, temporarily. That is just what stress does. I always like to say in my talks, you don't need to do calculus when you're running from the tiger. That
Right.
fight or flight syndrome literally produces cortisol and adrenaline and chemicals that shut down the executive functioning part of the brain. So a kid who's in chronic stress or chronic trauma or chronic, anxiety, for whatever reason, could be even environmental, could look a whole lot like an ADHD kid at any given moment, or could look a whole lot like an autistic kid at any given moment. So like the example you were giving, like he was ticked off, or he was nervous, or he was anxious, and so he shut down. That's, it's actually fight, flight, or freeze is another option. He froze, right? So because he froze in that moment of testing, they just took that freeze as being autistic instead of using the context and say, well, does he freeze when he's with friends, or does he freeze when he's at home? And what does it look like? And that's it. It's all about context. And I think really making sure that you have the context first. And the second piece is, does it actually inhibit their lives? Because just because you have it, you can have it and it doesn't inhibit your life. Like I happen to be blind in my right eye. It's not a huge disability for me. I drive, I do just about everything. So I don't really consider it a disability. It doesn't mean technically I have a disability. Right. I mean, I have a little, I don't know, letter O on my driver's license saying I have to have rear, a right mirror, which is kind of a joke now because all cars have mirrors on the right. But it's not it's not disabling and in most situations, except when I want to watch a 3D movie. That's a little.
And when's the last time there was a 3D movie? So can you talk a little bit more about, one of the things I find is that, as like the example I mentioned, I find that parents often, not all, but many parents tend to believe whatever diagnosis the mental health professional has given them must be accurate because they're a mental health professional. Can you elaborate a little more on how it could be difficult for a professional who is not, very well versed in ADHD or autism to get these confused?
Well, I think two things can happen. I think we have I know even when my son was diagnosed, and again, as I mentioned, he's 22. So we're talking about 17 years ago. Even when I brought him to a major children's hospital, most of the actual testing was not done by the psychologist. Much of the actual testing is done by people who are interns or aides or things like that, who then report back to the psychologist. And I am by no means saying that doesn't mean that they're not capable of doing the testing, but they tend to be less experienced, in doing that. And so it's not an infallible science. It's something that you need. It's a team effort. And so the team has to be really strong. And if you do have only one person, if they don't know what to pick up on, it can be very, very challenging. For example, I worked with a professional once and I was frustrated. Like I've been in the field so long. And this person had also been in the field for a really long time, but I had all these young women that I was counseling, and I knew they were autistic, and I was trying to get them an autistic diagnosis, and she just didn't see it. Like she just had a bias against these women. She just didn't see it because she defines there's subjectivity to all of this. It doesn't matter how objective you wish these instruments were, there's a subjectivity to it. It's dependent on interview. It's dependent on how a parent answers certain questions. I even found myself by the time I got to my fourth child and I'm checking off boxes for ADHD, I know what they're asking. So I don't know how biased I am. You know what I mean? So there's so many opportunities for cultural bias. There's so many opportunities for your own bias because you've read, like, let's say, for example, you're afraid your kid's autistic, and then you go online and you read all the symptoms, and then you get the parent questionnaire, and then before you know it, you're checking off boxes. It's not objective, it's subjective. Or have you ever I would fill it out, and then my husband would fill it out, and we had totally different ideas about what our own same child was doing. And I was like, are you serious? Of course he does that. No, he doesn't. Of course he doesn't. So it just points out that even though these are, what we want to say, evidence-based tools, of course they are. They've been studied and they've done that. It's not science. Behavior science is let me rephrase that. I don't want to say that behavior science is very studied. It is backed up. It is, there's research, there's statistics, there's all of that, but it's still not, it's not a blood test. It's not where a blood test where a certain marker comes up and we know that you have X number of white blood cells, therefore you, or maybe that's a bad example. A better example would be COVID. It's like, you do a PCR test and you have COVID because you have COVID. There's nothing that exact about this. It's a collection of understanding, and it's based on a lot of people's subjective interpretation. And if they don't have the experience to know what to ask and how to recognize when parents are either guarded and parents don't know what they don't know. So, for example, the parent interview is really the most important piece of a diagnostic. If you're talking about a child, even if you're talking about an adult, sometimes the parent interview is the single most important piece of the diagnostic process. You need a clinician who is experienced to know parents that might not know what they don't know. So they have to be able to ask the questions in a way to elicit the information that's going to lead them down the right path. So I've been in interviews, for example, where I'll start talking and they'll go, wait. And then they'll go run in the back and they'll go grab a different instrument because I mentioned something. And then they're like, wait, I want to check this out. That's a really good diagnostician because they are responding to the parent interview. And then that's weaving the way of what they're going to try to use the objective tools to match, if that makes sense.
Of course. And I think the other thing, Melita, just to add on to it, is that I'm going to speak from my own experience that there's little nuanced things that I think you don't really become aware of until all you do is see ADHD and autism constantly for years. And I feel for myself, I mean, that was not something that, just kind of speculate. It was, repeatedly seeing these patterns over and over and knowing how to discern these nuanced differences. And even during that process of understanding, right, how to differentiate based on asking these kind of nuanced questions to parents as well.
Yeah. And so, for example, like, I'll give you an example. Like one of my passions, because of the profile of my own son. So I have a son who's comes under the category of twice exceptional, meaning that he's considered gifted. This is my oldest son. He's considered gifted. Plus he has an ASD diagnosis. In that population, he's an imploder and he's a person that doesn't express things. So if he were to go through the ASD testing now, an inexperienced diagnostician probably would not diagnose him because he wouldn't check the box of repetitive. They would look for repetitive movements and they would look for those things, and he wouldn't self-report those things. And they're not big. My son doesn't flap. My son doesn't, but he does perseverate in his head. He does have repetitive thoughts. And so it's that when you're talking about nuance, that's the kind of thing where there is this like repetitive, perseverative thought patterns that are so characteristic of autism that he screams, if you will, internally. But you have to know how to pick up on that as well as the ones that are more observable, to be able to diagnose someone like that. And that's where, again, a less experienced diagnostician will miss that box. And if you miss one box, you have to have these certain boxes checked. One box you miss. On the flip side, any anxious person can have perseverative thoughts. They can get really, really stuck. So all of a sudden you can have an over ambitious diagnostician being like, well, he's stuck and he's stuck and he's stuck and he's stuck and he's pacing and anxious people pace. So that doesn't mean that he's just because he's pacing that he's autistic. So it can go both ways. Right.
I remember when, you and I got into the field, I remember being told by probably a psychologist that, there's cycles of kind of a quote in diagnosis. So I remember when I got into the field, it was ADHD. Everyone was being diagnosed with ADHD in the early 90s. Mid 90s, all the kids started getting diagnosed with Tourette's. And then, I guess, early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, then it was Asperger's. And I think some of that was actually justified because we did such a poor job of identifying what was then called Asperger's for so long. Is the sudden, kind of, I'll call it an explosion we're seeing in autism diagnoses that, other professionals have commented to me that they're seeing as well or hearing from parents? Is autism becoming the in diagnosis of this time? Or why does this seem to be happening now?
I do think that's part of it. I think that, people are afraid to miss it. So sometimes when they're afraid to miss it, that becomes its own opportunity for bias to creep in. Because there were other people for whom it was missed, right? And so, but I think what we're also seeing is I think goes back to something I started on before, is that because so many kids are experiencing now with COVID, we have even more kids that are experiencing trauma. I mean, because we've had a societal trauma. So even if you don't have a personal trauma in your life, we've had societal trauma. And so there's so much anxiety that it can lead to sort of tendencies that are getting exacerbated by the anxiety, and then it looks a lot like it on the outside. And so I think that's lending to an overdiagnosis, a little bit of an overdiagnosis bias. In that sense, I think parents are pushing for it as well. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, I think any parent, and myself included, it's like, we want answers. I mean, even myself, it was like, I was all excited. I got my son's ADHD diagnosis. I handed it to one of my friends who's a psychiatrist, and she was like, yeah, I don't think that's it. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Okay. To just be open to different perspectives and different things, because it's, nothing's black and white. Our kids are our kids, and the bucket we put them in is not what's going to help them. It's getting to know their nuances, their strengths, their abilities. These labels are only good insofar as they help us get the help that they need. And that's it. They're not helpful after that, they're really not helpful in any other way. And that's the irony of it. I mean, the one good thing is that, in terms of interventions, that piece of it, interventions are interventions, and they're probably going to work across the board. What the danger is the perception that you're going to perceive that your child or whomever, your loved one is limited because of this diagnosis, and then you self-limit them. Excuse me. You create an environment where they're limited because you perceive they can't. That's not what it is. And not that you should limit them when they have that diagnosis either. That's right. That's a whole nother website.
Yes.
But that's the bias of overdiagnosing, that you have all these kids with these labels, and then in school people assume they can't, and then they're not challenged enough, and they're not given enough opportunity. And they're just grouped with other kids that aren't going to be the best, best fit.
Right. Because I have a social media platform, I often hear from parents. And when I've spoken about, when I've heard about kids who I've worked with who were misdiagnosed with autism, and it's specifically for, the social piece, or, difficulty with what I call social executive function skills, it always seems to me that the person making the diagnosis does not have a great understanding that social skills are executive functioning, right, or an aspect of executive functioning. So if ADHD is an executive function developmental delay, you're going to struggle socially, right? Good chance of it. Not everyone with ADHD, but a good chance. I guess I'm just going to ask this directly. Why are clinicians not getting this?
Because there's no education. So I think that there's a bias in the clinical education. As a person who's been clinically educated, I'll mind you, a little bit long ago, but I certainly stay up on all of the CEUs and all of that. And the bias in clinical education is really on on mood disorders
Yes.
and things like that. They're not on these kind of other disorders. And I don't even like that word disorder, but they're not on these other challenges that our kids are facing. And they also rarely talk about how they interplay. So that's the other issue, you know.
Yes.
So for example, you have ADHD, but you also have anxiety. So how does the mood disorder of an anxiety disorder and ADHD interplay? So how does that actually end up being what kind of looks a little tiny bit like autism, but isn't, because, you know, you see social anxiety, but it's just social anxiety. And I think you need to understand, so it's just a lack of education. Educating about autism is not in our clinical education system. It's not part, I know as social workers, it's not part of the Council for Social Work Education's curriculum expectations. So it's just not in the clinician handbook to teach people, and it's left to a lot of us who are in the field as clinicians trying to reach out. And there's a desperation. I mean, I get questions all the time if I'm among other clinicians, how do I reach it? Because they're flooded. I mean, there's 10 to 15% of their population has either ADHD or autism, and that are coming to their practices. So it's not as though they're not coming across them, but they don't know how in particular to understand how the issues that they're coming to them with interplay. So it's just a lack. I just think it's a lack of understanding.
When you were talking about that, something came to mind that I haven't thought of for a while. A few years ago, I was doing a full day training called Understanding ADHD and Autism, in Philadelphia, and there was probably 50 people there, 50 clinicians in the audience. And I asked them, I said, and it was a mixture of, social workers, masters in counseling, psychologists, and I said, raise your hand if you got more than, one class where they talked about ADHD and autism. And nobody really raised their hand. And I said, raise your hand if anybody ever explained to you about executive functioning and, social skills and perspective taking. The one person who raised their hand was a neuropsychologist who went to an excellent program in Philadelphia. And she was the only one who raised her hand in a room out of 50 people, masters and doctorate level people. And I thought that was really significant.
Yeah, and I think that's what parents need to understand. Like parents are looking to clinicians to be the experts, and unfortunately, they're not caught up. I mean, and I think that's where you have to recognize how long institutions take to catch up, right? So that's when, like in our minds and in our hearts, autism's been around for this generation. It feels like it's been around for a really long time. But for those of us that are older, I mean, Asperger's only hit the DSM in 92, I don't know,
94, something, yeah.
Thank you, sorry.
Yeah.
In 1994. So we're talking about, less than 30 years, which may sound like forever, but in terms of when you think about cycles of clinicians, and the mid-age of clinicians, clinicians that are in their 50s were already out of school by then.
Right.
By the time Asperger's even hit, that doesn't mean that they don't have continuing education, but it means it's not enough part of real education now, but it wasn't it wasn't even a diagnosis when they were in school.
Right.
So these concepts, and it also speaks to the fact that what people also don't understand is that professions are much too siloed. So whereas you go into special ed and you as a parent, you're so educated, you're like, okay, I know what executive functioning is. I know what this is. I know what that is. Well, unfortunately, education has kind of like, I don't know what the right word is, coerced the executive functioning market, and it hasn't crossed into the clinician market. Like the clinicians, the therapists have not embraced it the way they should. It's not part of the traditional therapies to consider it, to think about it, to provide regular therapy that entertains that as part of the issue or part of the challenge or part of what's getting in the way for somebody with an autism or ADHD or related diagnosis, that executive functioning is part of the impairment that's causing other issues. And so it's part of that siloing of, because I remember as a clinician, the only books I could find when my son was in second and third grade were education books. There were no clinician books on executive functioning. It was all books put out by educators. And so just again, to understand that, like, we go to experts expecting them to know about it, but to really see this as a really new field. And so unfortunately, a lot of parents, when I was first raising my son, in the early 2000s, we knew we were new at it, and we knew the professionals were clueless. I think now this generation just assumes the professionals know it. But they're getting there. They're only starting to know it. And so you have to be just as questioning as we were, kind of as the renegades. We had to teach them. I literally had to walk into second grade and say, this is what executive functioning is, and this is what you need to do for my son. And, and this is not acceptable. And they're like, no, we'll teach him executive functioning in middle school. I said, no, you'll start right now in second grade. I mean, I had to advocate that hard in, how old was he? In 2007, because they didn't have a clue. An elementary, a very nice Philadelphia suburb, didn't have a clue in 2007.
And unfortunately, I mean, tell me if you agree, things have not come real far since 2007. I mean, I find a lot of educators still think that executive functioning means academic organizational skills. A lot of parents still think that. I would say, is it a fair assessment to say I think we're 10 to 20 years away from this being kind of common knowledge in the mental health field and the education field? Would you say?
I think it'll take another generation.
Another generation. Yeah. Okay. Over the past year, both myself and some colleagues, both in speech language pathology, mental health field, have noticed an increase in these late diagnoses of autism, despite the fact that there was no developmental history of the typical things we see in early childhood autism. And a lot of this is self-reported without speaking to the parents or somebody who knew the individual when they were younger sometimes. Why is this happening, these late diagnoses?
Well, I think there's two. I don't have a concrete answer for that. I think first of all, it's really not helpful. First of all, and it goes back to where we started, right? You can't do it without context. It's not helpful because any slice of time, any of us can look a certain way, and we can always be our own worst self-reporters, right? Especially when you're coming about these kinds of issues, because we don't know, so for example, and sometimes it is appropriate, but it depends on the context. So I have a brother, for example, who was in fact retrospectively diagnosed, but obviously, I guess I'm sort of revealing my age, by saying I got out of school in the 90s. And so, he graduated from high school in the early 90s himself. And so, Asperger's didn't exist then. And so he had learning, they gave him the, tagged learning disabilities and things like that. And then all of a sudden we look back and we're like, oh, yeah, and then we had all those patterns we could remember from his childhood. And so he did get retrospectively diagnosed, but it was correct because we had all those patterns from his childhood to go back to. So in answer to your question, I think there's two reasons. I mean, unfortunately, one reason is, at least I can speak to this area of the country, and I know this is a national, can be a national broadcast. Sometimes it's for access of services. Unfortunately, sometimes autism is a ticket to accessing services, and ADHD isn't, and that's a sadness that exists. I mean, like in a lot of school districts, autism will get you an IEP, and ADHD will only get you a 504.
Right.
And so I think sometimes that's a bit of the push, is to just get access to services, because if I've seen it here, at least I can tell you that's a piece of what I observed. But I think it still goes back to the constant we're saying, it's just a lack of experience, a lack of understanding that you cannot make these diagnoses without the developmental history. It's impossible.
Yes.
I mean, one of the things I had the privilege of doing was participating in what's called IBIS. You can Google it. It's the infant brain imaging study. It's been going on now for, he's 11, so it's been going on for like 12 years. And my youngest participated in it. And essentially what they did was they recruited children of, see if I can work this out, women that were going to become pregnant who already had a child on the spectrum, because the chances that they would have another child on the spectrum are extremely high. higher, let me
Mhm.
rephrase that, higher than the typical population. And so they self-selected that because they were trying to find the differences in what brains looked like in autism versus not autistic. And so once my child was born, I brought him at 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 24 months, and he had MRIs of his brain done, and then he had all the testing to see if he was autistic or not autistic. He was not autistic, the little guy, but he had all these, MRIs done, and that study actually had found it was so successful to find that they could find the brains were different in those babies. At 6 months, they went all the way back to 3 months, and they started scanning them at 3 months. And so my point is to say that autism exists from day one.
Right.
And so it's not something you get. Autism is something you are truly born with. And a lot of the other autism studies, one of my memories that stuck with me was an autism study that they did where they studied the first birthday videos of children.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a 99% success rate of predicting whether the child was autistic or not by whether or not they pointed.
Wow.
Because autistic children will not point because they're not interested in they're not interested is the wrong word. They're not yet aware. They don't share their experience with you develop at a developmentally same time, and sometimes ever, but even those that go on to do it will do it at a much developmentally delayed time. And so they don't point. And so it was like, okay, so this developmental history is so amazing. And that's where, it's the simple things that make you realize it. For example, like simple things like, did your kid ever bring you a picture to say, Mommy, how cool is this?
Mm-hmm.
And, I can say my kid on the spectrum never did that. My kid with ADHD did it all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just like, bang, bang, there's my diagnosis, like that's my like, my litmus test, so it's definitely a developmental thing you have to look back on. And I think that people just, I don't have a good answer. I wish I did. I just think that it's a little bit more of this lack of education, but I think a lot of it is the pressure to access services.
Right. 2 more questions before, if you don't mind taking some questions, if we can do that. What's your advice to parents who have received conflicting diagnoses, or question the validity of their child's diagnosis? Is there anything that you feel that they should do? Any action steps they should take?
Yeah, I think first of all, to say it's okay. I always like to say to parents, like, you got to trust your gut more than you think you're allowed to. I think that families are always afraid to trust their gut in this whole thing. And, I'm thinking of, I don't know why. I think because I was in an office today, and I was in a doctor's office today, and it was, they had a Disney sing along playing, and I was listening to Tangled, Mama Knows Best, right? Listening, that's one of the songs from Tangled, Mama Knows Best, or Papa. But, you really have this gut instinct. You are the one who knows your child. And so you can't expect somebody who saw them for, even if it was an extended evaluation for 1 or 2 days, to always have captured your child. And so you got to push on. It is really hard, but you can get other opinions. You can wait over time and see what evolves. You can continue to educate yourself. I think getting therapists, even though Ryan and I are both sitting here kind of maybe digging our own profession a little bit, that there aren't enough of us that have this expertise.
Yeah.
I think when you do find a clinician that does understand, the goodness of the advantage of that is someone who sees your child over time. And so that person can then inform a new another diagnostician in a way that maybe you can't, can add to what you can. I don't mean that, it's just another perspective. And they can see things, and they can help you point out things, and they can either confirm or help you, just say, yeah, I really, really see it, or no, I don't see it at all, and just kind of help you through that. So that kind of ongoing therapy whether it's, play therapy or CBT, whatever kind of therapy is the right therapy for your child. And I'm not here to make that, pronouncement right now, but somebody that has an ongoing rapport as a clinician is better than the 2 or 3 day diagnostician, that just had a snapshot. And I think that's what you have to look at. Like a diagnosis is a snapshot.
Yes.
You're the one with the movie.
Yeah. Yes.
And so just remember that and have confidence in that. And it's okay. And also it doesn't have to be perfect sometimes. Like it's okay if it just sits wrong for a little bit, as long as the services are correct. And as long as you don't let that limit what your child is able to do. And then it'll evolve and it'll catch up till it's the right thing.
Right. Something else I just want to bring up that I was thinking about. I often, speak about this repetitively in my social media because I want to educate people about what actually the recommended treatment is for ADHD, from the American Academy of Pediatrics. And what I learned at the medical ADHD conference this past year is I think it's 60% of parents, are maybe 80%, I can't remember exactly what it was, are never actually given the treatment recommendations. And my thing is I don't blame the therapist for that. If anything, it's the American Academy of Pediatrics not disseminating the information in a way that clinicians and pediatricians know what to where to direct families. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
So. One last question. There is and I'm seeing this increasingly, a tremendous amount of parents diagnosing their kids going on in like Facebook ADHD and autism support groups. I see a lot of parents diagnosing other people's kids who have no credentials to do so. And the latest thing is, as one parent, in my Facebook group, that said or described it, she said the obsession with diagnosing kids with pathological demand avoidance, which is not a recognized diagnosis in the DSM-4 or the ICD-11, nor is it a recognized diagnosis in the UK where it came from. What is your feeling, number one, about parents diagnosing their own kids? That's the first part of the question. The second one is, can you describe and talk a little bit how, the lack of resiliency to persevere through non-preferred tasks and how it's based in anxiety and how we came up with this kind of craze of pathological demand avoidance? And sorry, that was a lot at once.
It is a lot. So the first thing is, yeah, definitely stay in your own shoes. Like I can tell you, like, as I started off by saying that as a parent and a professional, it is extremely hard because I definitely saw other kids that I would be like, oh, that kid's definitely on the spectrum. And I wanted everything in my power to just say like, go get diagnosed, but just, that's not your place. Like, it's not your place to do that. It's not your place to do that. Your place is to, be a support. If someone asks questions, you can be a support and to just share your own experience. And I think to be true to that is the best way to be a support to someone else, is to just be true to your own experience, and let people have their own journey, because people need to do it in their own time when they're ready and when they're able. And everybody's got their own story. And, we could have, for example, a whole webcast on when do you tell your kid their diagnoses, and that's a very personal journey, and people have to make it at their own time. And with social media, it's like, no, you're doing it wrong. And no, you're doing it wrong.
Yes.
It's like, it's a personal journey. People have to make that decision based on so many factors, and it's so complex. So to really, pull back on that, social media is really, it's hard enough to be a special needs parent right now, on its own, and to feel, I feel like one of the things I do is I do this workshop locally called The Next Steps into Adulthood, and I work with parents and do this presentation about what adulthood is and what parents should be doing. And one of the main themes I have is just like, essentially like, cut yourself a break, like just be good to yourself. And you don't have to be perfect. Like, no parent is perfect. Like, it's almost like if we don't do this thing perfectly, I know I'm getting off your question. I'll come back.
No, it's not. This is important.
If we don't do this special needs parenting thing perfectly, our kid's going to be screwed up for life. And if there's anything you walk away with tonight, that's not true, because we are going to mess it up and we're going to do it great. We're going to do both. Because every parent screws up. And every parent does great if they love their kid. I was like, as long as you love your kid, you're going to be a great parent, you know? So as long as you keep working at it when you mess up, you're going to be a great parent. And it's anything, kind of looping back to this whole thing, the thing you can teach your kid the most is this resilience. Kids today are absolutely, one of the things that is causing them the most anxiety is the lack of knowing what to do when they fail. You know, I have two images that I'll share kind of on that subject. One thing that I remember going to a workshop, and this was on teens and teen suicide and all of this. Again, it was a professional workshop as a clinician. And I remember them saying that, like, it was teen suicide was spiking and it was out of control. And they said the number one reason it was out of control, and this was a decade ago, literally, I mean, it was at least a decade ago I went to this class, was because they thought when they failed, it was over. Like, they had no other idea what to do after they failed. Like, once they failed, it was over. Like, because they had never been taught how to pick themselves back up, because it was always someone else picking them up. So once they hit adulthood and there was no one else to pick them up, they thought, I'm no good. There's no tomorrow, you know?
Right.
And so, you know, that's one image that goes with me. The other image is this image, and I always do this in therapy, and I actually, I should have queued it up, and maybe I will during the questions, but there's this image of, I'm pretty sure it's Egypt, and there's this intersection, and I'm not kidding, I think there's 18 or 19 feeders to this rotary. If you can just picture 18 or 19 roads feeding this rotary, you know, traffic circle.
I've seen pictures of that, yeah.
And there's no traffic lights, and it is utter chaos. I mean, it's just utter chaos. I mean, it's like one car going, the other car going, like the other, you know. That's what we've done to our kids, because, you know, we've just said, like, here you go. And when they push back because we put traffic lights up, or we put stop signs up, or we put limits up, we've been like, ooh, we're going to damage them because we put limits up. And what we've done instead is handed them that chaos. Chaos creates anxiety. Rules, even if they're ticked, even if they're teenagers, rules create calm. We can hate them, we can rebel against them, but at least we know what they are. They create calm. The opposite is that there's just chaos. And for these kids, it's double chaos. I mean, it's chaos for all kids, but for kids with ADHD, for kids, they need structure. They crave structure. Again, even if they rebel against it, that's okay. That's normal. Actually, I remember going through a child development class and then being like, if your 2 or 3 year old doesn't rebel, you have a problem. And I was like, oh, really? Like you should be worried if they're too compliant. I'm like, really? Like, oh my gosh. Like, and I remember being like, oh, I remember as a behavior specialist going into early intervention homes and being like, ooh, they're giving you a hard time. Congratulations. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to do. And the parents going like, really? I'm like, yes, they're doing exactly what they're supposed to do. Aren't you excited? And then again, when they do it at 12, you know, when they go through that they basically do the terrible twos again at 12, and they're like, oh, I'm like, yes, they're doing exactly what they're supposed to. So I think parents need to educate themselves about what's developmentally appropriate, because if we miss those stages, guess what? It's going to come and haunt them when they're adolescents, and then even as adults. And so by not letting our kids go through the normal stages, by setting normal limits. So going back to your point of, what is the name of it again?
Pathological demand avoidance.
Yeah, of course kids are going to avoid demands. It's a power struggle. That's part of individuation. That's part of that developmental stage. Who's got the power, you or me? And just being like, oh, you've got the power. If you give your kid the power, like, God help you. Like, I mean, it's like, and I can't tell you, like, I have so many, I work in the field with individuals with more severe disabilities, who live in residential programs. When I get individuals that ran the house, who had all the power, it can take me 5, 6, 7, 8 years to just get that. And they're so unhappy. That's the part you have to understand. As adults, they are so unhappy. You think they're happy because they're running the house. They're not. When they get to be adults, they don't know what to do and they don't have a structure to their lives. And then and then all of a sudden life gives them limits that they never had before, because life has limits. That's life. And then all of a sudden they don't know what to do and they lash out. And, all of a sudden this 2-year-old lashing out looks like, a 260-pound 16-year-old lashing out, and then you're in trouble. And so it's okay. You are supposed to have the power. Your name is parent. Right. That's your job. And it doesn't mean that there's a difference between being having power and I don't mean power like, crushing their spirit power. Right. I just mean healthy limits and healthy, I'm the one in charge. And that's very different. I think we're so scared to go the other way into authoritarian, corporal punishment, whatever, where we're so afraid to crush their spirits that we don't set limits. Everything's about balance. And I think we just have to find that middle thing and recognize that we're now pathologizing literally healthy developmental steps.
Wow. This is another moment when I have to sigh and say, I will never explain anything as well as you. Seriously. Wow. I think I just want to make one point about what you said, that, I try to teach parents that when kids don't have that structure, I use the term screaming for scaffolding. And that it feels emotionally unsafe to them to not have that structure. Absolutely. Right. Does. And not have those limits. Yeah.
Hands down does. And the thing is, you can't judge a book by its cover. They can be screaming and F-bombing you and doing everything in their power. You're not there to please them. And I think that's where we lose it. And that's where we have to hold our anxiety. I just got any good therapist, I'm in therapy. All good therapists stay in therapy. Well, I think that's my opinion. Maybe that's not everybody's opinion, but it's my opinion. And I'm still learning it. I'm still learning how to hold my own kids' anxiety and they're young adults. How do you hold their anxiety? Because it's hard. It's hard to see our kids suffer. It's hard to see them upset. It's hard to see them angry. And so because we can't hold it, we sometimes try to make sure they don't feel it. It's not about them. It's about the fact that we can't hold it. So if we can get better about holding their feelings and not having their feelings cause us to spill over because we're too stressed in our lives, it gets a lot better. I can just tell you that from firsthand. This is me as a parent, not as a professional. I can tell you the more grounded I am and the more I can hold their stuff, the easier it is to set those limits and not just kind of give in and do all the accommodating that. And I've done it. I've done it. So I'm not, me too. I know it's not easy. I'm not preaching that I know it's easy. I'm just saying it's very, very necessary. And if we don't, we're really preventing them from developing according to the way they need to. And we're preventing them from being independent later.
Melita, one thing that I'm really fearful of is that we are going to not see an explosion, but we are going to see a gradual increase of, what used to be called failure to launch. I prefer the term non-emerging adulthood, Absolutely. Because of what you're talking about. And I think if I would give any advice to young clinicians out there, start learning how to deal with this because we're all going to have to deal with it more and more, more so.
Agreed.
Yeah. Wow. So thank you so much. This was amazing. Really.
You are so welcome.
Yeah. Can we take some questions?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Of course.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't see anybody though, and I don't see the chat.
Oh, you have to have YouTube open. That's why.
Oh, okay. Great.
Yeah. You have to have my YouTube channel open. Yeah. All right. Oh, well, I want to say Alyssa said, go cousin. Hi, Alyssa. Okay. Question. How can clinicians improve assessment skills to better distinguish autism from ADHD?
So, I think it comes in two ways. I think one is just really really researching what's at the core of what it looks like in the developmental history. I think that's the piece that gets missed. So that you know what to look for in the developmental history, because that's really where it's going to reveal itself. Because you can have someone with ADHD, as your example, Ryan. You can have someone that might kind of show up on the ADOS. You can't have the ADOS be the be all end all, even though it is quote unquote the gold standard. It's still never meant to be a standalone. Even the ADOS people will tell you it's never meant to be a standalone thing. So really the kinds of things I was saying, like educating yourself, like you'd be amazed how many simple things you can find and educate yourself to find out that, to ask a parent, like it's things that they wouldn't know, they didn't know, or what, excuse me, I don't know, I didn't word that right, but like they wouldn't know were different. So yes. For example, my kid was, my son with autism was the oldest. So I didn't know it was weird that when he was 5, he wasn't bringing me his pictures to say, mommy, isn't this cool? Right. Because he's my first kid. So it wasn't until my second kid that I was like, wait a minute, how come she's bringing me her pictures and he never brought me his pictures? You know what I mean? Like it didn't occur to me. So you can't, this one's fun. This was always one of my funny ones. Like when my son with Asperger's, well, I called it was Asperger's back then. When my son with Asperger's was 2, there was this thing called Reader Rabbit. It was a software program on the PC. And I sat him in front of the PC. God help me. Anyway, I did. And he would sit there for like 2 hours. And I didn't think that was weird that a 2-year-old would sit in front of the computer for 2 hours.
How old was he? Did you say?
2.
He 2. He was doing this.
2.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't think that was weird.
Right.
I didn't know that was
because you had no frame of reference. Yeah.
Right.
Wow. Okay.
But again, go back to the developmental history. Like, you know what I mean? Like that would be a really big red flag that somebody might not be developmentally typical if they're sitting in front of a computer screen for 2 hours, because that's not what 2-year-olds do. So, so really that's where the grounding is in terms of where you'll see, because it's this theory of mind stuff is really the core of the theory of mind, and the perseverative thoughts are the two really distinguishing factors between autism and ADHD from the way I look at it. Not that somebody with ADHD can't also have theory of mind, but the theory of mind issues that come into autism are so much deeper. Like the world is just my world. They're just not as, I don't know how to explain it. You can
I explain, Melita? Because I actually, ironically, I spoke about this morning with the boys at camp with the middle schoolers, because I wanted to explain this to them, and I explained it this way. I said, somebody with autism, they can have difficulty understanding that anybody has different thoughts than they do. They don't understand that anybody thinks differently. Somebody with ADHD, they might have trouble understanding somebody's thoughts, right, or understanding how they're coming across to others, the perspective-taking piece, but they know people, except for real young kids, they know people have different thoughts than they do.
Yes, that's a perfect delineation.
Yeah,
correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right, so I just want to apologize to everyone because I'm not going to be able to take all the questions, so my apologies in advance. I'm going to answer this, Melita, and then I want you to answer it because I want to see if we have different answers for it.
Okay. Sure.
All right. So 15-year-old diagnosed last year with inattentive ADHD, but he has always been very social. Do all kids with ADHD need meds? Here's my answer to this. I'm going to say that is... there's no kind of black or white answer, but the American Academy of Pediatrics treatment recommendations for children with ADHD 6 and over are parent training, which is what I provide, in conjunction with medication management. That's the recommended treatment. I want to hear what Melita has to say.
I want to say that you definitely get a consult and then make the decision together with your teenager. I can tell you one of the things, I'm going to speak as with my parent hat on instead of my professional hat. My son with autism, who also has really severe executive functioning, so actually has the dual diagnosis with the ADHD as well, and did go to college. Didn't go on meds. He didn't go on ADHD meds until he was I think a junior in high school, and boy, did he regret it. He wishes he had gone on it so much sooner.
Oh, is that so? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. He really, really like kind of, that's one of those like kicks me in the butt saying, Mom, why didn't you do that sooner? So I really think that you get a consult and you make the decision after the consult. It might be a no, it might be a yes. I don't know the answer to that, but you definitely get a consult so you can have all the information and your child is really involved in the decision.
And just to clarify, Melita, you're not saying allow the child to make the decision.
No.
Okay, right,
No,
because that's what I see parents do a lot. Yeah.
No. Just involve them with some input so they can say what they think they need, and
and that teaches them self-advocacy skills as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. A few comments here. We had several different diagnoses. She was a micropreemie, and that's pretty much what we refer to as we seek help. There's a real lack of understanding of executive functioning. Yes. Louise Bates Ames are great books for understanding developmental stages. Some references are dated, but otherwise good. I never heard of her. That's good to know. Okay. Sorry, there's some two-part questions. Our son fights expectations because he gets overwhelmed, anxious if he has a morning routine and several required activities such as exercise, chores, academics, even if the total time is 2 hours out of a 12-hour day, even with Ryan's routine charts. So we often wonder if he needs more free time and less structure this summer. I'm not sure how to answer that one.
Yeah, I'm not sure. You can answer it first, right? And then
I would need more. To be honest, I would need more information and I would have to ask questions to answer that. So, what do they diagnose children now who would have fit the
Excuse me. Let me go back to that. I will say one thing. That, and I don't. It sounds like that person just says ADHD. I will say that like it is important. It is important to balance the schedule, and it is important if the person has autism to give them a chance to be autistic. Like, I think that there's a lot of, like, if you think of in either case, like you think of like how, actually it doesn't matter, either diagnosis, all day long, they have to conform. Well, I shouldn't say always, but in most cases they have to conform, right? So if they're ADHD and they're fidgeters, they've got to all day long in school, they've got to hold it together and they've got to not fidget, and they've got to, like, for the most part, unless they've got a really progressive school, but for the most part, they've got to sit still and they've got to control their bodies, and so you have to make sure that there is in a schedule opportunities for let loose time, or like my son used to come home from school, my autistic son used to come home from school, and like when he was in elementary school, he would type on the computer. He would just type like 1 to 100 on Microsoft Word when he was like 7. Like, it was the stupidest thing. Like, I was just like, oh my God, like, why do I let him do that? But he was autistic. Like, it made him happy. So like, he just needed to be autistic. It calmed him. It made him happy. Most parents would be like, that's a waste of time. Forget that. Why are you doing that? Go outside, but that's what he needed to do. So it's got to be a balance in a schedule of a chance for them to not have to conform. But that doesn't mean abandon structure altogether. That's my one answer to that. Okay.
Thank you. Question. So what do they diagnose children now who would have fit the Asperger's criteria back then?
So now they come under the diagnosis autism spectrum disorder. And what it has is actually, I can even show you. You know what? Can I share screen, Ryan, or no?
Yeah.
I can actually show you because I happened to have this up. So can you see it? Let me put it on from current slide. Is that better? Can you see it?
Yeah.
So this is what, so now what they do is they put, I like this. I was a little fussy about it. I was a little sad when Asperger's went away because it's also sometimes a cultural identity for people. But this part I do like. They made there was PDD, NOS, so pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. Talk about a bucket. And then there was autism, and then there was Asperger's. So there are 3 different diagnoses, all got put into autism spectrum disorder. And then what they did is they put it into how much support do you need? Level 1, level 2, or level 3. So I like that because it doesn't say high or low functioning. I hate those words.
Mhm.
I really, really hate them. I fight them with all, because there is, what does it mean? I don't know what that means, but this is really clear. This is clear. How much support does that person need to, again, it goes back to kind of where I started, which was the question of how much, how much does it impair their daily life? And that's kind of how I think of level 1, level 2, level 3.
Mhm.
So typically an Asperger's person would be a level 1 because it's impairing them, but you could technically have someone that would have been Asperger's before because they had a normal intelligence who's a level 3. I mean, you could have someone that had a normal
Right.
intelligence who's it's impairing them so much that they're a level 3. So it's not a 1-for-1, but a lot of people who would have been in the Asperger's bucket would be autism spectrum disorder, and
Right.
then whatever level.
I like that graphic, by the way. I've never seen that before.
Yeah,
That's
I'll
a really
share
good graphic. Yeah, please.
from UNC. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. One more question. To answer somebody's question, yes, this is being recorded. You'll be able to watch it on your own time. What resources are recommended for young clinicians?
Ooh, that's a good question.
That is a good question. Yeah.
Can we put some together and put them up on your site, right?
Yeah.
I'd have to think about it. It's been a while since I put that list together, but so rather than speaking out of turn, let me put a list together.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Let's see. All right, so we'll take this one last question. Could those level 1 ASD traits also apply to those with ADHD?
Yes, all of them. And that's why it gets so confusing.
Yes.
So if I go back to that,
Yeah, pull it up again, please, if you can. Yeah.
Yep, okay.
And while you're doing that, Melita, one of the things I want to say is that research has showed us that people with ADHD have a more difficult time with employment. They tend to go through more jobs. They tend to be fired more, tend to have higher rates of divorce. And many of the kind of long-term outcomes, particularly for people who with ADHD who go unmedicated, could also very easily fit into this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think Melita, looking at that, I mean, obviously level 1, I mean, that's basically every person with ADHD for the most part,
Exactly.
Yeah. And, yeah. So, okay. So Melita, thank you so much for doing this. It was so incredibly helpful. And I really do learn something from you every time.
And I from you.
Thank you. And I hope everyone else found this helpful. And this will be up for you to watch. And then, we will, put up some resources there as well to help you out. And Melita, I hope you will come back and do this again because this was phenomenal.
Anytime, any topic, let me know.
All right. Thank you, everyone.